Welcome back to Keto and Crime. Today I'm diving back into the Chad Daybell trial with the testimony given yesterday, which was Tuesday, April 16th. Um, Today the prosecution cases continued, so we're going to dive back into that. If you're new here, my name is Tracy. I run this channel. I do true crime, dark history, some horror movie reviews. And I've been following the Daybell case since its beginning. I have a huge amount of playlists about it if you want to check those out. My goal here is to give you an entire day's worth of the trial in 30 minutes or less. I failed extravagantly on that yesterday. I think that video ended up being about 37 minutes, so I'll try to get this one in under 30. So I may gloss over things instead of going into them in as much detail as I did yesterday. A lot of what we went on in yesterday's testimony was about Google searches and things of that nature. So I anticipate it will go faster. So I'll do my best to get it in under 30 minutes. So as a result, I won't be playing any clips, any recordings. You can check out the many live streams of the trial to get all of that, or just Google anything that you wish to hear, and it's out there. So because of time constraints, I won't do that. I do a holiday tree. Right now I'm on Cinco de Mayo. So with that being said, let's dive in. All right, so testimony gets started pretty quickly with FBI Tactical Specialist Nicole Heineman back on the stand being questioned by Assistant District Attorney Lindsay Blake. They start again talking about Google searches, primarily Google searches that started in October of 2018, moving forward. That came from Chad Daybell's email, chad.daybell@gmail.com. So these were, his Google account. These searches originated from his Google account. There were several from bodies possessed after original occupant dies to searches for obituaries for Ned Snyder. Remember, Ned Snyder was the demon that supposedly had uh, possessed Charles Vallow. There was searches for the malachite wedding ring, and then there were also those same searches associated with one of Lori's email addresses as well. So a lot of searching going back and forth. Of particular interest was Ned Schneider, Louisiana obituary in 1997. Ned Snyder was a real person that died many years ago, and basically that is who supposedly whispered in Chad's ear, telling him that he had possessed Charles, if you believe in that sort of thing. There was also searches for Hiplos. There was searches for what happens when you surprise somebody with shocking news. Both of these originated, like I said, from chad.daybell@gmail and lollytimeforever@gmail. All this came from October 2018 through December 2019. There were also searches about returning and selling service dogs. Remember JJ's service dog for his autism? She attempted to sell it, but then realized that she was contract bound to the training agency to return it. That is the only thing that saved that dog's life. And then there were searches about how to remove the back seat from a Jeep Wrangler. At this point, Blake relinquishes the witness, and Pryor steps forward to cross-examine. He asks Heidemann if she's aware that Chad is not implicated in either Charles Vallow or Brandon Boudreaux's attempted murder. And Heidemann says, yes, that's correct. Mr. Pryor, we're well aware of that. Quit saying that. He's not on trial for those. He's on trial for his ex-wife, for his former wife, and the death of the children. So he asks again Heidemann about her background and how many different FBI agents she has spoken to about this case. She said a few, and said, have you been questioned about your testimony here? She says possibly, but nothing in depth. So basically, she establishes that she's not having daily discussions about her testimony in this trial with any of her contemporaries. Then Pryor talks about Lori Vallow, Alex Cox, Melanie Gibb, David Warwick were all around J.J. Vallow the day he died, and that, any of them could have done it. He's basically trying to implicate anybody but his client. He asks, why don't you have any Google searches originating with Melanie Gibb or David Warwick? And basically Hadman says they're not suspects in this. So, yeah. He also asked Hadman if she believes that what Chad was Googling could have just been a way to conceal his affair. She says it's definitely possible. Then Pryor shows the slide of chad.daybell@gmail.com searches and basically says, hey, there were 3 to 4 other people living in Chad's house at the time these searches were happening. Couldn't it have been any one of them? And he goes, absolutely. There's no way we can tell who was touching the keyboard, but the searches came from his Google account at his address. And then it's just also very conspicuous that the same types of searches were coming from the Lolly Gmail account that was Lori. And then he tried, of course, trying to pin it all on Lori, of course. Pryor was asking about Ned Schneider or Snyder. Hadman says that Chad regularly did searches for different people with that name or names similar to that, and because of its, occurrence in the Charles Vallow case, that it was something of interest. So basically, a lot of back and forth between Pryor and Hadman, Pryor throwing up every type of reason why somebody would be searching for those things, except that they're planning a murder. At that point, Pryor kind of throws David Warwick and Melanie Gibb under the bus by asking Hadman, are you aware that they profited from JJ's death? So I guess maybe they've been paid for interviews or they've made a lot of money with their podcast. She says no, she wasn't aware of that. So Blake has no further questions. Hadman is released, but is on the docket to possibly be recalled if needed. Next is Chandler, Arizona Police Detective Nathan Duncan. Being called by the prosecution, Lindsay Blake. He is a detective with Chandler, Arizona, and was part of the investigators on the death of Charles Vallow in July of 2019. He says that he responded to a report of a shooting. He did. They got to the residence where Lori was living with Tylee and JJ at the time. He arrived about 20 minutes after the original call. He said that the call came from Alex Cox. He said he had shot his brother-in-law, Charles Vallow, in self-defense. He said before this day, he had never heard of any of these people. He probably wishes he hadn't heard about them now. But Duncan was assigned to document the crime scene. So upon arrival, he said that he entered the foyer of the house. It was sparsely furnished, had hardwood floors. He said they went to the area where Charles was lying on the floor next to a baseball bat. He was bleeding. It was obvious to him that no CPR had been done, even though 911 had tried to urge Alex to do 911. The only attempted resuscitation was from the paramedics, where they had torn his t-shirt or cut his t-shirt and put fibrillation pads on him, and there was a lot of blood. Alex was sitting outside. He approached Alex, and basically Alex told him the same story we've heard, that there were a fight. Charles grabbed the bat from Tylee and attempted to strike Alex. The only wounds were on the back of his head. It wasn't that bad, and then he was shot. And then he talked about the condition of the body, the entry holes, the exit wounds, the fact he had been shot twice, just reiterating everything about that investigation. Then, of course, we get to the point that Blake admits a PowerPoint exhibit that Duncan had prepared, and there's a sidebar about that. And then they talk about the slideshow after it's admitted that shows Charles Vallow's cell phone extraction data. And they talk about the texts and the stuff and the email addresses associated with Charles Vallow, the one where Charles said he would pay Chad very well to be his ghostwriter. that Chad had asked him to come visit him in a few days to talk about the book project and the publishing business. Then Blake goes into how they ascertained that this particular exchange between Chad and Charles was probably fake, that it was faked. Charles had nothing to do with it. So probably between Lori and Chad, just to make it seem that this was a legitimate relationship and not an extramarital affair. I don't want to speak ill of the dead. I don't think Charles was part of this, but the fact that Vallow and Cox and Daybell were so self-important, it just, anyway. Uh, Blake then asked Duncan if he was aware of the other investigations that as he was working on Charles's case. He says he became aware of Tammy's potential death and the attempted shooting of Brandon Boudreaux, as well as the missing children. He then asked Duncan if Lori had brothers named Alex and Adam. Duncan says she did. He says Adam was never a suspect, but Alex was. Then they look at a slide that shows text messages between Charles and Lori. Charles confronts Lori about the affairs in the text and calls Lori evil. So showing a lot of data between Lori and Charles that shows there was a lot of animosity there. Charles then tells Lori in another text that he has Tammy Daybell's email address and he will email her. He tells Lori he better explain to him what's going on or he's going to blow them out of the water with Chad's wife. Blake then asked Duncan if he learned Charles tried to make contact with Tammy. He says Charles did send emails to Tammy, but there is no indication she ever looked or received them. So did they go to spam? Did Chad intercept them and delete them? Or did Tammy just not pay any attention? We see another text between Charles and Lori where he tells Lori he has emailed Tammy and their game is up. He then asks her to stop spending money on credit cards. Duncan says there is no evidence that Charles ever tried to visit Tammy in person. They now look at an email where Charles sent an email to Tammy's work in June of 2019. He told her he had something vital and disturbing about her husband and his wife. And then he says, I apologize to be the one to say this. There was no proof that Tammy ever read the emails. They weren't sent, read request receipt or anything like that. They now go through some more emails between Charles and Lori. Charles trying to talk about Tammy. They said they were not aware of an official divorce proceedings between Charles and Lori, that they were only separated with Lori and the kids in Chandler or Gilbert, and Charles having relocated to Houston for his job. And then we talk about some of the emails and texts that were in the Lolly iCloud accounts, Lori for Style and Lolly Time, talking about exchanges between Alex and Lori about getting rid of Ned, or it's not Ned, it is Ned, let's get rid of Ned. So Ned, because we know that they really thought, or said they thought, that this Ned had possessed Charles, that they were actually talking about Charles. Then they fast forward a little bit to a text message from a lady named Nicole to Lori on October 19th, saying had she heard that Chad's wife died, and Lori says, oh my gosh, no, I'm in Hawaii. The lady asks Lori what happened, and Lori says Tammy woke up in the night coughing and threw up and collapsed and passed away. So she knew about the death far beyond anyone else, in my opinion. Then we see a message from Melanie Gibb to Lori on the same day and saying, I heard what happened to Chad's wife. Oh my gosh. And Lori responded, hello, what? So Lori was playing two sides of the field, and one she knew about it and one she didn't. It was like she would play ignorant if anybody questioned her about it, but she obviously knew it and she knew the details. Playing that she did not know it. And then there was communication between Lori and Colby Ryan about about him trying to get in contact with Ty Lee and not being able to. And so then we see more receipts and emails and texts from the iCloud accounts, including the plane tickets, more talking about Ned, more talking about possible getting rid of Ned, and then also Charles and Adam planning an intervention. So Charles Vallow and Lori's brother Adam Cox planning an intervention on Lori because of all the crazy that was going on. So she had a family that legitimately cared. She just, yeah, whatever. Then there were text messages between Chad and Lori on that morning of July 11th that Charles died. There was really no content of what was said, but they just showed that they were texting pretty heavily between 6 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. that morning. And then there's another one on July 18th where Lori sent Chad a message saying she got a letter from the insurance company saying she is not the beneficiary, talking about how it was a spear through her heart. And then she said that he probably changed everything over to Kay. And Chad responds, "Wow, that's terrible. Is there no way to find out?" And Lori said, "Nope, they won't talk to me." And then they go back and forth. "I love you. This is terrible, but is another step in bringing down the Gatadons." These are their enemies. And then they talk about Brandon, how Brandon is especially problematic. And then Chad wrote, "It will be interesting if he changed after he had 2 bullets in his chest." Yeah. So that's a threat. That's definitely a threat. And then Lori kind of just sums it up that Lori believed that after Charles' death, she'd be getting his life insurance, and he was gone. They would have all this money. And then she was just kind of resigned. "Well, I still get $4,000 a month for Social Security." So again, finances. This was all about finances and being free to do what she wants. And then we now see a message from Chad to Lori on July 26, 2009, the infamous Harry Potter text. And then another text that Alex sent to Lori on September 3rd, talking about the network name at Chad Daybell's house being Too Many Kids, and Lori to Alex, "That's funny." And then the last known sighting of Tylee was around September 8th. And then the last known sighting of JJ was around September 22nd. Again, we see the Yellowstone picture and then the picture of JJ with the yogurt or the milkshake on the couch where he's wearing his red pajamas. And so they go back and forth, some more texts between Lori and Chad, more lovey-dovey stuff. And then Blake asked Duncan if he reviewed content from Zulema Pastanani's phone, and he did. Zulema was married to Alex. They reiterate that. And then he said there was a lot. He called it voluminous. There was a lot of text between Zulema, Alex, Zulema, Chad, a lot of, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say hippy-dippy, talking about blessings and Mother Earth and how they're grateful. Mother Earth is grateful for Lori and Zulema and Chad, and just a lot of, cognitive dissonance going on with these people. He said he never saw one indication that anybody was grieving Charles. And that's pretty sad. And then we see some emails from Karen at the Avow Network, A Voice in the Out of the Wilderness, the prepper network that Lori and Chad were connected with, talking about a youth conference that they want Chad to speak with, and they offer Chad a speaker's fee, a flight, and a place to stay. And then they talk about communication, more communication between all of these people. Basically, Katie asked Chad for his phone number, and so that she can further communicate. And then there's the infamous phone call with the funeral director, where Chad says he's just starting the process of helping the family with the cremation and needs a price. So he's trying to arrange for Charles's burial and things. The lady tells him cremations are around $1,600, and it includes transportation. She lists out the other fees. The total price is $2,000. And then Chad says he's going to call some other funeral home. So $2,000 is too much to waste on Charles, I suppose. Then for the next hour, they dismiss the jury and the gallery for lunch. And then there's like an hour of arguing between the defense and the prosecution before the judge, because literally John Pryor wants to call prosecutor Rob Wood as a witness to impeach his character. So there's a lot of evidence by that. So that's kind of still left up in the air. This just gets more and more insane. And finally, we get back going, and by putting the jury back in the box, and then they continue this argument. Basically, what Pryor's trying to do by possibly putting Wood on the stand is to admit over 342 texts and emails implicating Melanie Gibb and David Warwick. I mean, he's trying to throw blame around everywhere, but finally it comes down to call the chief prosecutor as a defense witness would be highly unusual, and it's concerning. So it's tabled, and Pryor kind of says, well, I don't plan to call him anyway. So, yeah, whatever. All right. So basically, we're back to the same witness as before. Chandler Police Detective Nathan Duncan with Lindsay Blake continuing his examination. They talk more about the funeral home call, and then they talk more about a blessing, evidence of a blessing. There was a phone call, an email, some other stuff on Lori's iCloud, and talk about what patriarchal blessings are, that they're used in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they are used to usually by only patriarchs, or you have to be recognized to do an official blessing, pretty much. And Chad was not authorized by the LDS Church to give such blessings because these people were kind of fringe. Blake moves to admit a recording of the blessing that Chad gave Alex Cox, and they do listen to it. As I said, you can find that recording on East Idaho News. And then Chad gives the blessing, said he's part of the Church of the Firstborn, which is their cult. And Chad says Jesus Christ has authorized his blessing. Then Chad talks about wanting to open the portals of time. I bet he wishes he could open them now. And sees Alex on the third creation being a warrior. So he's setting Alex up as some Michael archangel kind of thing. And then talked about how wonderful it is that he's protected his sister. He tells Alex that you've already assisted him and Lori in ways that can never be repaid. Hint, hint. And the basically just goes on pumping up Alex about how all his sins are forgiven and how he will gather souls who will come under Christ and protect the important, and he will be in New Jerusalem as a messenger of God because he's turning him into Hermes. And then Chad begins to cry and tells Alex he will be a prophet and he will raise their vibrations. Cue Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch. Chad then tells Alex that he will know before natural disasters are happening. He will be on hand to protect the important church leaders. He's setting Alex up as something else, I tell you. And then Chad talks about as the second coming approaches that Alex will know when it's time to move to the other side, meaning die. And his spirit will leave his body and he'll be welcomed by the Savior. And of course, we know Alex died about a month after this. So he keeps talking about protecting Lori and all the eternal glory, blah, 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 blah. It's a very long blessing. And then finally, Blake resumes the direct examination, asking the detective if he heard the voice of Lori Vallow on the recording. He says he did. Duncan says it stood out a lot to him because between the male voices. And then they talk more about the Church of the Firstborn. If it was affiliated with the Mormon Church, he says they are not affiliated. It's something that that these people made up. And then Blake asked him to confirm when Alex Cox died. He said December 2019, as far as they know, of natural causes, but because the body was cremated, they can't exhume it or do any further investigation. Duncan then admits that he himself was born into the Mormon Church, and he says he really doesn't have a background in it. And then Pryor begins his cross-examination. Pryor then asks Duncan more about his background as a Mormon, and he says, look, I really don't have any kind of clergy or ecclesiastical knowledge about the Mormon church. I was just raised a Mormon, like any typical Mormon kid. And then Pryor asks about Zulema saying light and dark. Duncan is totally unfamiliar with that term. Pryor asks about death percentages and vibrations. Duncan says he has never heard about that in any mainstream Mormon teachings as far back as when he attended church. And then Pryor asks about removing evil spirits from the bodies and asks if the LDS recognizes things like possession and exorcism. And he says he's unfamiliar with any of that doctrine in the mainstream church. And then they talk about more of the information on Lori's iCloud. Pryor says is it unusual for Chad and Lori to communicate with each other because they were having an affair? Duncan says no, that if they're having an affair, it would not be unusual for them to communicate with each other. And then Pryor asks if it's unusual for a prosecutor to tell witnesses how to testify. Duncan says there is witness preparation in cases, and it's not highly unusual. So again, he's trying to demonize Rob Wood. And then he asks about the Arizona prosecutor's decision about not to charge Chad Daybell in connection with Charles Vallow's death. Duncan says, yes, I'm well aware that your client is not charged. He didn't say it like that, but your client was never charged in Brandon Boudreaux or Charles Vallow. They talk more about the investigation around the death of Charles Vallow, and he again reiterates that Chad Daybell is not being prosecuted for any of those crimes. Pryor then asked Duncan if he knows what Chad did for his job. He said he was a writer and a publisher. And then Pryor goes on about Melanie Gibb, David Warwick, and Zulema. He says they were all members of the LDS faith. They talk about all these things. And so Pryor again asked Duncan if he's aware of all of that spirituality being in the Mormon church. Do you become a god or goddess? Duncan said he is not aware of that. Now, I've done videos on the Mormon church. You can find some of those up here. And in their original doctrine, becoming a god of your own planet was something they inspired to after death. So that it was in the original doctrines of Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, but I'm not sure if it's still there. I'm not a Mormon. I don't follow that faith, but that was in the original doctrine. But Duncan says he himself is not aware of it, and that wasn't taught, at least in the churches he attended. Duncan said, but I did leave LDS at 18 and became another denomination. Pryor then asked more about the patriarchal prayer and asked if it's a crime in Maricopa County to give a blessing. Duncan says no. And does this insinuate they committed a crime? And Duncan says no, not necessarily. And then Pryor asks who Zulema Pastanettes is. Duncan said she was married to Alex Cox and was a friend of Lori Vallow. And she asks if he thought that the relationship between Alex and Lori was very close. He says yes. Is it unusually close? And he says, I personally don't know. And then Pryor asks about the day Charles was shot. He confirms that Alex, Lori, Tylee, and JJ were all present in her home at one point during that day. And that Alex told police there was an argument between Charles and Lori that got out of control. And as the argument continued, Tylee came out of the bedroom with the bat, and that Alex was hit. And then that is when he shot Charles after Lori left the house to take JJ to school with Tylee. So that is all confirmed. And then they talk about the funeral home call where Pryor asked when the call was made. He said it was made, Duncan said it was made the night that Charles died. Pryor says that would it be unusual since they were having an affair if he wouldn't want to help her in a time of need? And Duncan says no, that's not unusual. And then Pryor asked Duncan if he was aware the blessing was 2 weeks before Alex died. Duncan said yes. And then that Alex died of natural causes and there was no funny business. Duncan says that we know of. So he cut Pryor off. He goes, Pryor says no funny business, and then Duncan says that we know of. And then he talks about how he's aware of Alex had traveled to Mexico for some cheap prescription drugs before he died. Duncan said, yes, I am aware. Pryor has nothing, has no more. Blake does do some redirect. She asked if Duncan was involved in investigating Alex Cox's death. He said he was not. Blake asked Duncan if he is aware of what drugs Alex bought in Mexico. Duncan doesn't know. And then they talk about his last trip to Mexico was around November 24th, just weeks before he died. He asks what was Duncan's opinion as an investigator on the Charles Vallow's death relation to Chad Daybell, and he said he did recommend charges, at least accessory charges, for Chad Daybell at the time, but the district attorney chose not to. Blake has no further question. Pryor asks for more time with this witness, to which Blake objects, but Judge Boyce does allow further redirect. So Pryor asks Duncan if he knows everything about Chad, Lori, and Alex. Pryor just, I don't know. And Duncan says he does not. He goes from being a qualified attorney to just annoying. And then basically, after Pryor, Blake says he does not know everything about these four people. Pryor says he has nothing further, and he is released with the anticipation he may be called again. Next witness called by Rob Wood is Social Security Special Agent Mark Saari. Basically, they conclude that his job with the Social Security Administration is investigating potential fraud. So Rob Wood takes over the questioning, and basically Saari says that in January of 2020, the FBI contacted his office to help determine the whereabouts of JJ and Tylee and to find out if there was fraud going on with their Social Security payments. Saari met with law enforcement and the FBI. He confirmed that Tylee received about $1,850 a month because of her father, Joseph Ryan, who had died in 2018. Lori Vallow received the payments because Tylee was a minor at the time. And Saari says that Social Security benefits went to a J.P. Chase Morgan account, and Lori was also on the account. Saari says the bank account changed to a BBVA account on or about August 20th, 2019. Wood then admits a notice that Lori Vallow received notifying her of the bank change, and the letter was sent to Social Security Administration on August 27th, 2019. He then confirms that J.J. Vallow started receiving $1,950 a month in September due to the death of his father, Charles Vallow, in July, and that, again, Lori Vallow was the representative. And then they talk about the bank that money was going into as well, that Lori also received child, mother, and care benefits for taking care of JJ since he was special needs. So Lori also received $1,951 a month, and that was then ended because they were made aware that the children were missing. Wood asked if people are required to notify Social Security if they have a change of circumstances, and he said yes. If they move, someone dies, gets married, disappears, what have you. Wood then admits an exhibit and shows it to the jury. It's a copy of reporting responsibilities given to Lori Vallow when she began receiving the payments for J.J. Vallow. And then basically they confirmed that she never reported that she married Chad Daybell, that she removed to Hawaii, and that she never notified them that JJ was missing or was eventually deemed as deceased. And then they confirmed that the money belonged to the U.S. Treasury and the taxpayers, not Lori Vallow. And so Wood has no further questions, and Pryor begins cross-examinations. Pryor says, oh, you heard a lot about Lori Vallow, but are any of these documents in regards to Chad Daybell? Saari says no. He says Daybell is not listed on any of the documents. He had nothing to do with any of the Social Security payments or the responsibilities of that. And then he clarifies the amount that Lori was receiving due to JJ and Tylee, and that he confirmed that the benefits for Tylee would have ended when she turned 18 in 2020. Prior then adds up how much Lori was receiving a month from Social Security. It was between $5,700 and $5,800 a month. That's Tylee's benefits. Her benefits is the caregiver for JJ and JJ's benefits. And so Prior releases the witness. Wood has no redirect. The witness will not be recalled as they've settled all their information. And court was adjourned for the day after that. I will be back tomorrow talking about what happened today, Wednesday, April 17th, if you're watching this right after it was released. And until next time, Keto Krime.